Maggie Hollister pressed her back against the saloon wall and slid to the dirt. Her hands were shaking. Her lip was split. The bruises on her wrists had turned the color of thunderclouds, and she hadn't eaten in 4 days. She lifted her face to the blazing Wyoming sun and whispered the only prayer she had left. "Please, just water. That's all I'm asking." Nobody stopped. Nobody looked. Until a little girl tugged her father's sleeve and said 5 words that changed everything. "Papa, she's hurt real bad." If this story touches your heart, subscribe and follow Maggie's journey to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The sun sat high and mean over Dusty Creek, Wyoming territory. July heat pressed down like a branding iron, and the air tasted of chalk and horse sweat. Silas Brannigan pulled his wagon to a stop outside Taggart's General Store, dust billowing around the wheels like smoke from a grass fire. "Stay put," he told his children. "I won't be long." Jesse, 10 years old and hard-jawed for his age, didn't look up from the stick he was whittling. "We ain't going nowhere." Ruby, 6, and small enough to disappear inside her own dress, pressed her face to the wagon's side rail. Her eyes swept the street the way they always did, searching for something she couldn't name. Something that had been missing for 2 years. Silas climbed down boots hitting packed earth. His supply list was short. Flour, coffee, salt, nails. His pockets were shorter. He adjusted his hat against the glare and headed for the store. That's when Ruby said it. "Papa." Her voice was barely a whisper. "She's hurt real bad." Silas turned. A woman sat against the saloon wall, knees drawn to her chest, head bowed. Her dress was filthy, torn at the shoulder. Her hair was cut short, jagged, like someone had hacked it with kitchen shears. But it was her arms that stopped him. Purple bruises wrapped around both wrists like shackles made of flesh. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting there, still as stone, like she'd used up every last bit of fight and had nothing left but breathing. Earl Taggart stepped out of his store, broom in hand. He spotted the woman, and his lip curled. "You still here?" Earl said. "I told you this morning. No money, no service. Move along before you spook the horses." The woman didn't move. "You hear me?" Earl raised the broom like he meant to sweep her off the sidewalk. Silas stepped forward. "Earl." The storekeeper turned. "Silas, don't tell me you're fixing to get involved in this." "I'm fixing to buy supplies, but I ain't walking past a woman who looks like she's been through hell without asking if she needs water." "She needs to move on is what she needs. Showed up 2 days ago. No name, no money, no husband, just trouble wrapped in a torn dress." Silas ignored him. He pulled his canteen from the wagon and knelt beside the woman. Up close, the damage was worse. Split lip half healed, a yellowing bruise along her jawline. And her eyes, when she finally lifted them, were the color of creek water in October, clear and cold, and full of things she'd never say out loud. "Ma'am." He held out the canteen. "You look like you could use this." She stared at it, then at him, then at the canteen again, like it might be a trap. "It's just water," he said quietly. Her hand reached out, trembling. She took the canteen, drank 3 long swallows, and handed it back. Her voice came out cracked and raw. "Thank you. When's the last time you ate?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Silas reached into the wagon bed past the feed sacks and pulled out a strip of dried beef and a biscuit wrapped in cloth. He set them beside her boot. "Ain't charity," he said. "Just common decency." She picked up the biscuit. Her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped it. She bit into it and closed her eyes, and something crossed her face that wasn't gratitude. It was grief. The grief of someone who'd forgotten what kindness tasted like. "Papa." Ruby had climbed down from the wagon. She stood 3 feet from the woman, head tilted, studying her with the fearless honesty only children possess. "What happened to your arms?" "Ruby," Silas warned. But the woman looked at the little girl. "I fell," she said. Ruby shook her head slowly. "Nuh-uh. Those are grabbing marks. Billy Tucker grabbed my arm at school once, and it looked like that. Mama said—" She stopped. Her face crumbled. She hadn't said the word mama in months. Silence. The woman's eyes went soft. "Your mama sounds like she was smart." "She was," Ruby whispered. "She died." "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "It's okay. Papa says she's watching from heaven. But I don't think she can see real good from up there, 'cause she never waves back." Silas's chest split open. He scooped Ruby up and held her against his shoulder, pressing his lips to her hair. God almighty. 2 years, and the child still stood at the window, waving at the sky. "We should go," Jesse called from the wagon. His voice was flat, controlled. "We got chores." Silas set Ruby down. He looked at the woman one more time. She was eating the beef jerky, slowly rationing it, making it last. Every movement careful, practiced. This was someone who knew hunger intimately. He went into the store. Earl Taggart was already behind the counter, arms folded. "Before you say a word, Silas, no. I don't know her, I don't trust her, and I ain't feeding her on credit." "I didn't ask you to feed her. I asked for flour, coffee, salt, and nails." Earl started pulling items from shelves, moving slow, making a show of it. Word of advice. Stay clear. A woman shows up alone, bruised up, no ring on her finger. That's a story with a bad ending. Maybe. Or maybe the bad ending already happened, and she's looking for a new beginning. Earl snorted. "You always were soft, Brannigan. That's why your spread's half the size of Hank Mesa's." "My spread feeds my kids. That's big enough." Earl counted coins, licking his thumb between each one. "Reverend Whitfield says she might be a runaway wife. Says a man's got legal claim to his own woman. Says—" Earl. Silas leaned on the counter. "I didn't come here for a sermon. I came here for nails." He paid, gathered his supplies, and walked out into the blistering heat. The woman was still there. Ruby had climbed down again and was sitting beside her in the dirt, chattering about their cow Bessie and the barn cat, who only came out when the moon was full. The woman was listening, really listening, not performing patience, not enduring a child's noise, but leaning in, nodding her eyes alive for the first time since Silas had seen her. Jesse watched from the wagon arms, crossed, jaw tight, the mirror image of Silas at that age. Angry at the world for taking what it shouldn't have touched. "Ruby, come on," Silas called. "We're heading out." Ruby grabbed the woman's hand. "You should come with us. We got food in a barn and everything." "Ruby. Papa, she's hungry, and her arms are hurt. You said we always help people who are hurt. You said that's what Mama would want." Damn if children didn't remember every word you said and throw them back at you at the worst possible moment. Silas looked at the woman. She was already shaking her head. "I can't impose, sir. You've done enough." "Where are you planning on going?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down the road, the long, empty, sun-hammered road that led to nothing but more of the same. "That's what I thought." Silas pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "I got a ranch 10 miles out, fence that needs mending, garden that's half dead, 2 kids I can barely keep fed and clothed. I ain't offering charity. I'm offering a fair deal. You work, you eat, you sleep in the barn loft. Separate from the house, proper and decent." "Silas Brannigan," Earl Taggart's voice carried from the doorway. "You taking in strays now?" "I'm hiring help, Earl. Mind your own business." "Folks'll talk." "Folks talk regardless. At least this gives them something interesting." The woman studied Silas for a long moment. Her eyes moved from his face to his children, measuring, calculating. Not whether he was kind, she'd already seen that, but whether kindness was something she could afford to trust. "I don't take charity," she said, "and I don't give it. I'm offering work, hard work, sun up to sundown. You earn your keep or you move on. That's the deal." "What's your name?" "Silas Brannigan." I'm Maggie. Maggie Hollister. Well, Maggie Hollister, you any good with a garden? Something flickered across her face. Not a smile, she wasn't ready for that, but the ghost of one. I can grow anything that'll take root. Then we got a deal. Jesse's voice cut from the wagon like a blade. No, we don't. Silas turned. His son stood in the wagon bed, fists clenched, face red beneath his sunburn. Jesse, we don't need her. We don't need nobody. We've been fine on our own. We've been getting by, son. That ain't the same as fine. Mama wouldn't want some stranger in our house. The words hit Silas like a fist. He saw Jesse's chin quiver, saw the boy fighting tears with every ounce of his 10-year-old will. She ain't going in the house, Silas said gently. And your mama would want us to help somebody who needs it. You know that. You don't know what mama would want. She's dead. Silence fell like a hammer. Ruby's eyes went wide and wet. Maggie looked away, giving them privacy she knew they needed. Earl Taggart had the decency for once to go back inside. Silas climbed into the wagon and knelt in front of his son. You're right, he said quietly. She's gone, and I miss her every single day. But being angry at the world ain't gonna bring her back, and turning away from someone in trouble ain't who we are. It ain't who she raised you to be. Jesse's jaw worked. Tears streaked through the dust on his cheeks. He wiped them roughly with his sleeve. She sleeps in the barn, Jesse said. Not the house. That's the deal. And she don't touch Mama's things. Nobody touches Mama's things. Jesse sat down hard, turned away, and went back to whittling. Conversation over. Silas climbed down and offered Maggie his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. Calloused palms, working hands. This woman had labored hard and recently. She climbed onto the wagon seat. Ruby squeezed between them, already talking about the chickens. Jesse sat in the back, silent as a stone, watching Maggie like she was a rattlesnake that hadn't decided yet whether to strike. They rolled out of town. Earl Taggart watched from his doorway, already composing the gossip he'd spread before sundown. Reverend Whitfield stood across the street, Bible clutched to his chest, shaking his head with practiced sorrow. Maggie sat straight-backed on the wagon seat, clutching a small bundle, everything she owned in the world. She kept her eyes forward, but Silas noticed her hands. They were gripping the bundle so tight her knuckles had gone white, and every few minutes she'd glance over her shoulder at the road behind them, not admiring the view, watching for someone. You in some kind of trouble, Maggie? Silas asked, keeping his voice low enough that the children wouldn't hear over the wagon's rattle. She was quiet for a long time. Isn't everyone? That ain't an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. He let it sit. A man who pushed too hard too fast learned nothing. A man who waited, he learned everything. They rode in silence for 3 miles. Ruby fell asleep against Maggie's arm, her small body trusting in the way only a child's could. Maggie looked down at the sleeping girl, and something cracked in her expression. Pain, longing, the ghost of something she'd lost or never had. She's beautiful, Maggie said softly. She looks like her mama. She's lucky to have you. Some days I ain't so sure. I am. Maggie's voice was steady. A man who stops for a stranger in the street, that man's children are lucky. Silas didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The road stretched out ahead of them, shimmering with heat. Dust devils spun in the distance like lost souls looking for a place to rest. When the ranch came into view, Maggie's breath caught. It wasn't much a log cabin, a weathered barn, a corral where 2 horses stood switching flies. But the garden, even half dead, showed care. The fence, even sagging, showed effort. And on the porch a rocking chair sat empty, positioned to catch the evening breeze. Someone had loved this place once. That's home, Silas said. Maggie nodded. It looks like it hurts. He glanced at her, startled by the accuracy. Yeah, some days it does. He showed her the barn loft. Clean hay, a wool blanket, a lantern. Ain't fancy. I've slept in worse this week. He didn't ask where. She didn't offer. Supper's at sundown. Pumps by the trough. Privy's behind the barn. He paused at the barn door. One more thing. My wife's name was Caroline. She died 2 years ago. Her things are in the cabin. Nobody touches them. That's not a request. Understood. He nodded once and left. Maggie stood alone in the barn loft, listening to his boots crunch across the yard. She set her bundle down and sat on the hay bale. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against her knees and forced herself to breathe. Safe. For now. She reached into her bundle and pulled out the only weapon she had, a kitchen knife with a worn wooden handle. She slid it under the hay beside where she'd sleep. Old habits. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the quiet. No shouting, no breaking glass, no heavy boots on stairs. Just wind through barn boards and the soft breath of horses below. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Maggie Hollister's hands stopped shaking. But rest didn't last. That evening, after a supper of beans and cornbread eaten in silence so thick you could cut it with a knife, Maggie walked back to the barn. The sun was dropping fast, painting the sky red and orange. She paused at the water trough to wash her face. That's when she heard Jesse. He was sitting on the corral fence whittling. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "You ain't staying." Maggie wrung water from her hands. "Your daddy offered me work. I intend to do it." "He feels sorry for you. That's the only reason." "Maybe. Does it matter?" "It matters because the last time he felt sorry for something, he brought home a 3-legged dog that died in a week. You ain't much different." Maggie almost smiled. Almost. "I've got all my legs, if that helps." Jesse's knife paused mid-stroke. He looked at her, then really looked, and she saw it, the fury, the terror, the desperate need to protect what little he had left. "My mama was the best person in this whole territory," he said, voice tight. "She sang every night. She smelled like lavender. She could calm a spooked horse just by talking to it. And she died alone because my daddy wasn't here." Maggie's chest seized. "I ain't letting nobody take her place," Jesse said. "Not you, not nobody. Ever." "Jesse." Maggie leaned against the fence post, keeping distance between them. "I'm not here to take anyone's place. I'm here because I had nowhere else to go. That's the truth, and I won't lie to you about it." "Then why were you sitting in the dirt in town? Who hurt you like that?" Her jaw tightened. "That's not a story for a 10-year-old. I ain't a regular 10-year-old. I've been running a ranch alongside my daddy since I was 8. I've killed rattlesnakes and skinned elk and dug my own mama's grave. So don't tell me what stories I'm too young for." Maggie was quiet for a long time. The sky had gone from red to purple. First stars pricked through the darkness. "My husband hurt me," she said, "for a long time, and one night I decided I'd rather die running than live staying, so I ran." Jesse stared at her. His knife hand dropped to his side. "Is he coming after you?" "I don't know. Maybe." "Does my daddy know?" "Not yet." Jesse hopped down from the fence. He was small for his age, wiry, sunburned. But he stood like a man twice his size. "If he comes here, I'll shoot him." "Jesse." "I ain't joking. Nobody's hurting nobody at this ranch. Not while I'm breathing." He walked away toward the cabin, boot steps hard and deliberate. At the porch, he turned back. "You can stay for now. But you hurt my daddy or my sister, and I swear to God and every angel my mama's sitting with, you'll wish you'd kept running." He went inside and shut the door. Maggie stood alone in the falling dark. Somewhere a coyote called. The horses shuffled in their stalls. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart beating hard, fast, alive. She climbed to the barn loft, lay down on the hay, and slid her hand under the straw until her fingers found the knife handle. She wrapped her fingers around it and stared at the ceiling, listening to every sound the night made. She almost slept. Then she heard hooves, distant but unmistakable. A rider on the road from town moving slow. Maggie sat up. Her grip tightened on the knife. The rider paused somewhere near the property line. Sat there for a long moment. Then turned and rode back toward town. Maggie didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she climbed down from the loft and walked to the main road. In the dirt, clear as scripture, she found what she'd been dreading: fresh horse tracks. Someone had come in. The dark watched the ranch and left. She knelt and pressed her palm to the track. Her hand was steady now. Fear had burned through her and come out the other side as something harder, something sharper. She walked back to the barn, washed her face, tied back her short hair, and went to start the morning fire in the cabin. When Silas came down from the loft, she had coffee boiling and biscuits in the skillet. He looked surprised. "You didn't have to." "I told you, I earn my keep." He poured himself coffee, took a long sip, and studied her over the rim. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I sleep light." "Maggie." He set the cup down. "If there's something I need to know—" "There isn't. Not yet." She met his eyes. "But when there is, you'll be the first I tell. That's a promise." He held her gaze. Whatever he saw there, truth, determination, the steel spine of a woman who'd survived what should have killed her, it was enough. "All right then." Ruby appeared at the top of the loft ladder, hair wild, eyes half closed with sleep. She saw Maggie and smiled so wide it could have split the morning open. "You're still here." "I'm still here, sweetheart." "Good." Ruby scrambled down the ladder. "'Cause I want to show you where the wildflowers grow. Mama used to pick them every Sunday. Nobody picks them now." Maggie knelt to Ruby's level. "Then we'll pick them together." In town that afternoon, Earl Taggart nailed a fresh piece of paper to the post outside his store. A notice hand-delivered by a well-dressed man who'd ridden in from Kansas 3 days prior. Reward $50. For information on the whereabouts of Margaret Hollister, wife of Denton Hollister of Abilene, Kansas. Short hair, slender build, may bear marks of a recent illness. Contact D. Hollister at the Creek Hotel. Earl read it twice, then looked down the road toward the Brannigan Ranch. He smiled. 3 days Maggie worked without stopping. She mended the corral fence before Silas woke the first morning. She pulled weeds from the dying garden in heat that would have dropped a mule. She scrubbed the cabin floor on her hands and knees until the wood showed its grain again. She cooked meals that made Ruby clap her hands. Biscuits with honey stew thick enough to stand a spoon in cornbread that crumbled golden and warm. She asked for nothing, not a kind word, not a thank you, not a glass of water. She didn't pump herself. Silas watched from a distance the way a man watches a horse he can't quite figure, respectful, cautious, impressed despite himself. She outworked him some days, and that was saying something. But Jesse watched too, and Jesse wasn't impressed. He was suspicious. On the 4th morning, Maggie was splitting kindling by the barn when the boy appeared. He leaned against the fence, arms crossed, studying her swing. "You're chopping wrong," he said. Maggie drove the hatchet into the stump and straightened up. Sweat ran down her neck. "How's that?" "You're swinging with your arms. You gotta use your hips, like this." He mimicked the motion. "Mama taught me." "Your mama taught you to split wood." "My mama taught me everything." His chin lifted. She could do anything a man could do. Better, mostly. Maggie picked up the hatchet, adjusted her stance, swung again, this time rotating from the hips. The log split clean. Jesse blinked. "Better." "Thanks." He pushed off the fence and started walking away, then stopped, didn't turn around. "The garden needs water twice a day in this heat, morning and evening. You're only doing mornings." "I'll fix that." "See that you do." He walked off, and Maggie let herself exhale. That was the most words Jesse Brannigan had spoken to her since she'd arrived. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't war either. That afternoon, Ruby found Maggie kneeling in the garden, hands deep in dirt, coaxing a tomato plant back from the dead. "What you doing?" "Trying to convince this stubborn thing to live." Ruby knelt beside her. "Mama used to talk to the plants. She said they listen if you're patient." "Your mama might have been right." "She was always right. Papa says so." Ruby pressed her small hands into the soil. "Can you teach me?" "Teach you what, sweetheart?" "Everything. Mama was teaching me letters before. Ruby's voice dropped. "Papa tries, but he gets the sounds wrong, and Jessie says I'm too slow." Maggie sat back on her heels. "You're not slow." "Jessie says—" "Jessie's wrong. Some of the smartest people I ever met took their time learning. It means the knowledge sticks deeper." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Tell you what, every evening after supper we'll sit on the porch and I'll teach you letters. One by one. No rushing." Ruby's face split into a grin so wide it nearly broke Maggie's heart. "Promise?" "Promise." That evening they sat on the porch steps while Silas cleaned his rifle inside and Jessie pretended not to listen from the loft window. Maggie traced letters in the dirt with a stick. "This one's R, for Ruby." "R," Ruby repeated, tracing it with her finger. "What else starts with R?" "Ranch, river, rain." "What about run?" Ruby looked up. "Does run start with R?" Maggie's hand stilled for just a heartbeat. "Yes, baby. Run starts with R." "I don't like that word. Mama ran to get water and she never came back." The air went out of Maggie's lungs. She pulled Ruby close, pressed her lips to the girl's hair. "Sometimes people run away from things, but sometimes they run toward something better." "Did you run toward something better?" "I'm starting to think maybe I did." From inside, Silas heard every word. He set down the rifle and pressed his palm to the table, steadying himself against the quiet devastation of his daughter's grief and the stranger who seemed to know exactly what to do with it. The days found a rhythm after that. Hard work under a punishing sun, short conversations over meals, the slow, careful dance of strangers learning to share space. Maggie rose before dawn and was the last one standing at night. She never complained, never sat idle, never asked when her debt would be paid. Silas found himself looking for her in the mornings, listening for her footsteps crossing the yard, noticing that the cabin smelled different now, bread and wildflowers instead of dust and loneliness. He hated himself for noticing. One evening after supper, he found Maggie at the water trough scrubbing a stain from her sleeve. He got closer and realized it wasn't a stain. It was blood. She'd torn her palm open on barbed wire while mending the east fence and hadn't said a word. "Let me see that," he said. "It's nothing." "Maggie, let me see." She held out her hand. The gash ran deep across her palm, still seeping. He took her hand, gently turned it over. Her fingers were calloused nails, broken skin, roughened by years of labor. But the bones underneath were delicate. "Why didn't you tell me? I've had worse." 3 words, spoken flat matter of fact. And they told him more than any confession could. He cleaned the wound with whiskey. She didn't flinch, wrapped it with clean cloth, tied it firm but gentle. The whole time, neither of them spoke. His hands around hers, the lamp throwing long shadows, and a silence that felt like the edge of something neither one of them was ready to name. "Thank you," she said when he finished. "You gotta tell me when you're hurt. Can't have you bleeding out in my pasture. Would that be inconvenient for you?" He looked up. She was almost smiling. Almost. The faintest crack in the armor she wore like a second skin. "Deeply," he said. "I just got the fence fixed. Hate to dig a grave right next to it." She laughed. It came out startled raw, like a sound she hadn't made in years. She covered her mouth with her bandaged hand, surprised by her own voice. Silas stared at her. He hadn't heard a woman laugh in this yard since Caroline. The sound hit him somewhere between his ribs and his backbone, a place he'd thought was dead. "Go get some rest." he said, rougher than he intended. "Long day tomorrow." She nodded and walked toward the barn. At the door she paused. "Silas." "Yeah." "You're a good man. I don't say that lightly. I've known the other kind." She went inside before he could respond. He stood by the trough for a long time, staring at the bandage cloth he'd tied around a stranger's hand, wondering when she'd stopped feeling like one. That night, Jesse couldn't sleep. The loft was hot, the air thick and still. He climbed down the ladder, meaning to get water, and saw through the window that the barn door was open a crack. Lamplight flickered inside. He crept across the yard barefoot and peered through the gap. Maggie sat on a hay bale in the loft facing the barn door. Her back was straight, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the entrance. In her right hand she held a knife, not a big one, but sharp, the blade catching lamplight. She wasn't sleeping. She was standing guard. Jesse watched her for a full minute. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift. She just sat there, knife in hand, watching the door like something might come through it at any moment. He'd seen coyotes sit like that, right before a wolf pack closed in. He stepped on a board, and it creaked. Maggie spun knife up, body coiled to strike. When she saw it was Jesse, the knife dropped to her side. Her breath came fast. "Lord boy, you trying to get yourself cut?" "You sleep with a knife." She didn't answer. "Who are you watching for?" Jesse stepped into the barn. His bare feet left prints in the dust. "Who's coming, Maggie?" "Nobody. Go back to bed." "Don't lie to me. You told me you wouldn't." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the guard was down just for a second, and Jesse saw something that chilled him more than any Wyoming winter. Terror. Raw, bone-deep, soul-sick terror. "My husband," she said quietly. "His name is Denton, and he's not a good man, Jesse. He's not a good man at all." "Is he the one who put those marks on you?" "Yes." "Is he coming here?" "I don't know. But if he does, I want to be ready. I won't let him hurt anyone in this house. That's why I sit up." Jesse was quiet for a long time. He looked at the knife at her bandaged hand, at the dark circles under her eyes. Then he walked to the corner of the barn where Silas kept the hunting rifle locked in a cabinet. He reached behind it and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. "This was my mama's Derringer." He unwrapped it carefully. A small pearl-handled pistol gleamed in the lamplight. "Daddy don't know I know where it is. Mama showed me before she died. Said every woman should know where the gun is." He held it out to Maggie. "Jesse, I can't." "Take it. A knife won't stop a man like you're describing. This will." Maggie stared at the boy. 10 years old, standing in a barn at midnight, offering his dead mother's gun to a woman he'd wanted gone 3 days ago. The world was cruel and strange, and sometimes in the smallest moments, unbearably kind. She took the Derringer. It was light in her hand, loaded. "Thank you, Jesse." He nodded once sharp. "Don't tell my daddy." "I won't." "And Maggie." "Yeah. If he comes, wake me first. I ain't letting nobody die alone on this property, not ever again." He walked out of the barn, and Maggie sat holding the gun, and the knife, one in each hand, tears sliding silent down her cheeks. She pressed her lips together hard, refusing to make a sound. She hadn't cried in front of Denton in 3 years. She wasn't about to start crying now. But this was different. Denton's cruelty she could survive. It was the kindness that was going to break her. The week wore on. Heat built and built, pressing down on the land like a lid on a pot. Silas rode to the north pasture each morning, checking cattle mending wire. Maggie ran the homestead like she'd been doing it for years, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden that had already started to recover under her hands. Ruby followed her everywhere, chattering, learning, blooming like the tomato plants Maggie had coaxed back to life. And Jesse. Jesse was changing. He didn't smile at Maggie, didn't welcome her openly. But he stopped fighting. He passed her the salt at supper without being asked. He left fresh water in the barn loft each night. Once he caught her struggling to move a feed sack and simply walked over, grabbed the other end, and helped her carry it without a word. Maggie understood. The boy wasn't ready to accept her. But he'd stopped trying to push her out. For now, that was enough. One afternoon, Silas came in from the pasture, early sunburn, deepening the lines around his eyes. He found Maggie on the porch, mending one of Ruby's dresses. Ruby sat beside her, practicing letters on a slate-board tongue poking out in concentration. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. Maggie looked up. Ruby didn't. She was too focused on the letter M. M is for Maggie, Ruby said proudly. And for Mama. They both start the same. Silas felt something shift in his chest. A wall he'd built brick by brick over 2 years, and a 6-year-old had just pulled one loose. Ruby girl, go check on the chickens. But I'm doing letters. Chickens first. Letters after. Ruby sighed dramatically and hopped off the porch. Silas sat down in the chair beside Maggie. Caroline's chair. He hadn't let anyone sit in it since she died. Maggie noticed. She started to stand. Stay, he said. She settled back down, needle and thread in hand, waiting. Somebody was asking about you in town. Maggie's needle stopped. Earl Taggart told me this morning. Said a man rode in from Kansas 5-6 days ago. Well-dressed, polite, asking about a woman with short hair and bruises, offering $50 reward. The color drained from Maggie's face. Her hands gripped the fabric so tight the needle bent. He put up posters, Silas continued. Says you're his wife. I was his wife. I'm not anymore. Law might see it different. The law didn't see him break my ribs. The law didn't see him burn me with a hot iron. The law didn't see him put me through a wall when I told him I lost the baby. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. The law didn't see any of that, Silas, so I don't much care what the law sees now. Silas was quiet for a long time. A muscle worked in his jaw. What's his name? Denton Hollister. He owns a saloon in Abilene. He's charming. Everyone loves him. He buys drinks for the whole bar and tells jokes that make people laugh. And then he comes home and he... She stopped. Drew a breath. He's very convincing, Silas. He'll come here and he'll shake your hand and he'll tell you I'm troubled. That I imagine things. That he just wants to bring his poor sick wife home. Will he come here? Yes. When? Soon. If he knows which direction I went, he'll narrow it down. He's patient. That's the worst thing about him. He never gives up. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Maggie, I need you to look at me. She turned her head. Her eyes were dry, fierce, terrified. This is my land, Silas said. My home. My children. And right now you're under my roof. Any man comes here meaning harm. I don't care if he's got a badge, a Bible, or a bill of sale, he goes through me first. Silas, you don't know what he's capable of. I know what I'm capable of, and I ain't the kind of man who hands a woman back to the one who broke her. Maggie's chin trembled. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. Why? She whispered. Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. My wife died alone. His voice caught. He pushed through it. She laid in this cabin bleeding, calling my name, and I wasn't here. I was 20 miles away buying supplies I didn't need because I thought there'd always be more time. He looked at his hands. I can't fix that. I can't go back and hold her hand and tell her I'm sorry. But I can make damn sure that no woman on my land ever faces something terrible alone. That's the only promise I got left that means anything. Maggie pressed her bandaged hand to her mouth. She breathed through her fingers, fighting for control. When she spoke, her voice was raw. He'll hurt you. He'll hurt your children. He burns everything he touches, Silas. Then he picked the wrong ranch. We don't burn easy out here. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since she'd stumbled into Dusty Creek, half dead and wholly broken, Maggie Hollister believed she might survive this. Not alone. I should go, she said. Before he finds me here, I should disappear and— You run, he follows. That's what men like him do. They follow until you're too tired to run anymore. Then they drag you back. So what do? You stop running. You stand. And when he comes, you don't face him alone. She stared at him. You'd do that. For a stranger. Maggie, you ain't been a stranger in this house for days now. My daughter smiles because of you. My son gave you his mama's— He caught himself. Maggie blinked. You knew about the Derringer. I know everything that happens on this ranch. He almost smiled. Jesse thinks he's sneaky. He ain't. Are you angry? That my boy wanted to protect you? Silas shook his head. That's the first decent thing he's done since his mama died. I ain't angry. I'm proud. Maggie let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like a lifetime. That evening, something shifted. Supper was louder. Ruby told a long, tangled story about a chicken that she was convinced could count to 3. Jesse argued that chickens couldn't count at all, and they went back and forth while Silas ate his stew, and Maggie served seconds without being asked. When the dishes were done, Ruby grabbed Maggie's hand and pulled her to the porch. Letters, time. They sat together on the steps, Ruby tracing words in the dirt, while Maggie guided her hand. Jesse drifted to the doorway, leaning against the frame, pretending to sharpen his knife, but actually listening to every word. What does SAFE spell? Ruby asked. Safe, Maggie said. What does that mean? It means nobody can hurt you. It means you're protected. Ruby nodded seriously. Like here. This place is safe. Maggie's throat tightened. Yeah, sweetheart. This place is safe. From the doorway, Jesse's knife went still. He looked at Maggie, and for the first time his expression wasn't anger or suspicion. It was something quieter. Something that looked in the lamplight almost like trust. Silas sat at the table inside, coffee going cold in his hands. He could hear them on the porch. Ruby's laughter, Maggie's patient voice, the scratch of a stick in dirt. Sounds he'd thought he'd never hear in this house again. He looked at Caroline's quilt on the wall. I know, he said softly. I know. Whether he was apologizing or asking permission, he couldn't say. Maybe both. Later that night, long after the children slept, Maggie climbed to the barn loft and found something waiting on her blanket. A pillow. Worn cotton goose feather smelling faintly of lavender. She picked it up and held it to her chest. It was Caroline's. She knew it the way you know certain things by the scent, by the care in the stitching, by the weight of what it meant. She didn't know who'd left it. Silas. Jesse. Maybe Ruby sneaking out while no one watched. It didn't matter. She laid down, pressed her face into the pillow, and breathed in the ghost of a woman she'd never met, but was beginning to love. The Derringer sat under the hay. The knife rested beside her hip. But tonight, for the first time, her hands weren't gripping either one. She slept. And 3 miles down the road, in the back room of the Creek Hotel, Denton Hollister sat cleaning his revolver by candlelight. On the table beside him lay the poster with Maggie's description, a half-empty whiskey bottle and a hand-drawn map with one ranch circled in black ink. Earl Taggart's handwriting. Beneath the circle, 2 words, Brannigan Place. Denton smiled. It was the kind of smile that made dogs whimper and children go quiet. He holstered the revolver, blew out the candle, and laid down in the dark. Found you? He whispered. Maggie woke to the sound of Ruby screaming. She was off the hay bale and down the barn ladder before her eyes fully opened, the Derringer in one hand, knife in the other. Her bare feet hit dirt, and she ran toward the cabin, heart slamming against her ribs so hard she could taste copper. She burst through the cabin door and found Ruby standing on a chair pointing at the floor. A garter snake slithered lazily toward the hearth. Just a snake. Maggie's legs nearly buckled. She leaned against the doorframe, hiding the gun behind her back, forcing her breath to slow. Jesse appeared from the loft, saw the snake, and scooped it up bare-handed. It's just a garter, Ruby. It ain't gonna hurt you. It was on my foot. 'Cause you leave your boots on the floor instead of hanging 'em up like I told you 100 times. Silas came in from the yard axe still in hand. He looked at Maggie in the doorway, barefoot, wild-eyed, breathing hard, one hand hidden behind her back, and understood instantly what she'd thought. "It's okay," he said quietly. She nodded, slipped the derringer into her apron pocket, and knelt beside Ruby. "Hey, you're all right. See, Jesse's got it." Ruby threw her arms around Maggie's neck and held on tight. "I hate snakes." "Me too, baby." Maggie's voice was steady, but her hands shook against Ruby's back. "Me too." Jesse carried the snake outside and tossed it toward the pasture. When he came back, he looked at Maggie. Really looked. He'd seen how fast she'd moved, how she'd come through that door ready for war over a child's scream. He didn't say anything, but something in his face shifted, and it didn't shift back. After breakfast, Silas told the children to stay close to the house. He saddled his horse and nodded for Maggie to walk with him toward the corral. "I'm riding into town," he said. "Need to know what we're dealing with." "Let me come." "No. If he's there, I don't want him seeing you. Not yet. Not until I know his play." Maggie gripped the fence rail. "Silas, he's smart. He'll have a story ready. He'll make you doubt everything I've told you." "He can try." "I mean it. He once convinced a sheriff that I fell down the stairs the same night he threw me through a window. The sheriff brought me flowers and told me to be more careful." Silas put his boot in the stirrup and swung up. He looked down at her from the saddle. "I ain't a sheriff, Maggie, and I ain't bringing you flowers." "What are you bringing?" "Answers," he wrote out. Maggie watched until the dust swallowed him, then turned back to the cabin where 2 children were waiting, and every minute felt like an hour. Silas reached Dusty Creek by mid-morning. He tied his horse outside Taggart's store and went in. Earl was restocking shelves, humming to himself. "Morning, Silas. What brings you in?" "Cut the manure, Earl. Who's the man from Kansas?" Earl's humming stopped. He set down a tin of peaches and turned slowly. "Don't know what you mean." "The man asking about Maggie, the one who put up posters, the one you drew a map for." Earl's face went the color of old milk. "Now hold on. I didn't draw no. Your handwriting's on the map, Earl. I seen your invoices for 10 years. You think I don't know your chicken scratch?" Earl's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a catfish pulled from the creek. "Where is he?" Silas asked. "Creek Hotel, room 6. "But Silas, listen to me. That man is her legal husband. He's got papers. He's got rights. You're on the wrong side of this. A man who beats his wife don't have rights. He's got fists. There's a difference." "She tell you that, and you believe her. Woman shows up out of nowhere, no money, no references, covered in bruises. She could have got anywhere." "Earl." Silas leaned across the counter. "Did you look at her wrists?" "I seen 'em. Grab marks, finger-shaped, both arms. You get those from falling downstairs." Earl looked away. $50, Silas said. "That's what he offered. That's what her life is worth to you." "It ain't like that." "It's exactly like that." Silas straightened up. "If anything happens to that woman because of your map, I'm coming back here, and I won't be buying supplies." He walked out. Earl Taggart stood behind his counter, hands shaking, and for the first time in his miserable life wondered if money could buy back a conscience. Silas crossed the street to the Creek Hotel, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. He pushed through the door. The lobby was empty except for Martha Grimes behind the desk, fanning herself with a newspaper. "Room 6, Silas said. "He ain't in. Left about an hour ago. Said he was going to see the Reverend." Silas's jaw tightened. Of course. Denton Hollister wasn't coming with guns. He was coming with God. He found them on the church steps. Reverend Amos Whitfield sat beside a man Silas had never seen, tall, well-built, wearing a pressed shirt and a smile that could sell water to a drowning man. Clean-shaven, steady eyes, boots polished to a shine. Denton Hollister looked like the most decent man in the territory. That's what scared Silas most. "Ah, Mr. Brannigan." Reverend Whitfield stood. "This is Mr. Hollister. He's come a long way looking for his wife." Denton rose and extended his hand. "Silas Brannigan, I've heard good things about you. Hard-working man raising 2 children on his own. That takes grit." Silas didn't take the hand. "What do you want with Maggie?" Denton let the hand drop unfazed. His smile didn't waver. "She's my wife, Mr. Brannigan. She left during a difficult time. I was ill bedridden for weeks, and when I recovered she was gone. No note, no explanation. I've been worried sick. She seems fine where she is. I'm sure she does. Maggie is good at making people feel sorry for her. It's part of her condition." Denton's voice dropped with rehearsed sorrow. "She has spells, Mr. Brannigan. Delusions. The doctor in Abilene treated her for hysteria. She imagines things, injuries, threats, conspiracies against her. I've spent 3 years trying to get her proper care." Reverend Whitfield nodded gravely. "Mr. Hollister has shown me medical papers, letters from a physician. This poor woman needs help, Silas. Christian help." Silas looked at Denton Hollister's polished boots and pressed shirt and easy smile, and he thought about Maggie's wrists, about the burn scar she kept covered with her sleeve, about the way she flinched when a door slammed, about a woman who slept sitting up with a knife in her hand. "She ain't delusional," Silas said. Denton's smile flickered. "Just a fraction, just enough. With respect, sir, you've known her for what, a week? I've been her husband for 8 years. I think I know my own wife." "Then you know she's got burn scars on her arms." Silence. Denton recovered fast. "She burned herself during one of her episodes. That's exactly the kind of behavior I'm trying to protect her from. And the finger marks on her wrists. She grabbed herself too." Denton's jaw tightened. The smile held, but something moved behind his eyes. Something cold and flat, and very, very controlled. "Mr. Brannigan, I haven't come here to argue. I've come to bring my wife home. The law is on my side. Reverend Whitfield can attest that a wife's place is wherever she chooses to stand," Silas said. "And right now she's choosing to stand on my land." Reverend Whitfield stepped forward. "Silas, be reasonable. This man has traveled hundreds of miles. He has legal documentation. The Bible clearly states. The Bible also says, 'Thou shalt not bear false witness.' Reverend, you might want to read that part again before you start quoting scripture at me." Denton's smile finally dropped. What replaced it was worse, calm, cold patience. The look of a man who was used to waiting and used to winning. "I'll be in town for as long as it takes," Denton said. "I'd prefer to resolve this peacefully, but I will resolve it." "That a threat?" "It's a promise, from a husband who loves his wife." Silas stepped close enough to smell the whiskey on Denton's breath beneath the cologne. "I've got a promise too. You come near my ranch, you come near that woman or my children, and peaceful won't be an option." He turned and walked to his horse. Behind him, he heard Denton's voice, low and pleasant, talking to the Reverend as if nothing had happened. Already spinning. Already planning. Silas rode hard. The sun beat down and dust coated his throat, but he barely noticed. His mind was turning over everything Denton had said, looking for cracks, finding plenty. Medical papers, letters from a physician. Hysteria. He'd seen this before. Not with women with horses. A man beats a horse raw, then tells the buyer it's spirited, puts a blanket over the scars and calls them sensitive skin, smiles real wide and talks real smooth and hopes nobody looks too close. Denton Hollister was that man. And Maggie was the horse he wanted back in the barn. When Silas rode into the yard, Maggie was waiting on the porch. She stood the moment she saw his face. "He's here," she said. Not a question. "He's here, staying at the Creek Hotel. He's already got the Reverend on his side. Says you're hysterical. Says he's got medical papers." Maggie's face went white, then red, then something beyond color, Something raw and furious and ancient. Medical papers. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dr. Albright in Abilene. Denton paid him $200 to write that I suffered from feminine hysteria. I went to that doctor with a dislocated shoulder and left with a diagnosis that said I was crazy. Maggie? He did this in Kansas too. Every time I tried to tell someone Denton had a paper, a witness, a friend who'd swear I was out of my mind. He built a cage made of lies, Silas, and everyone helped him lock the door because he smiled so nice while he did it. She was shaking. Not with fear, with fury. She paced the porch, hands clenched, jaw tight. What did he say about the scars? Said you did it to yourself. She stopped pacing. Slowly, deliberately, she rolled up her left sleeve. Silas had seen the bruises. He'd seen the healing cuts. But he hadn't seen this. A scar the size of a palm, ridged and shiny just above her elbow. The shape was unmistakable, the flat base of a clothing iron. Does that look self-inflicted to you? Her voice was steady as a rifle barrel. He heated the iron on the stove because I burned his supper, pressed it to my arm and held it there while I screamed. Then he told the neighbor I'd had an accident while doing laundry. Jesse appeared in the cabin doorway. He'd heard everything. His face was chalk white, his fists balled at his sides. I'll kill him, Jesse said. No. Maggie turned to the boy. You won't. You're 10 years old, and you've got a life ahead of you that's bigger than any man's cruelty. You hear me? But I hear you, Jesse, and I love you for it. But violence is his language, not ours. The word slipped out before she could catch it. Love. She saw Jesse flinch, saw the war on his face, the desperate need to reject it, and the deeper, hungrier need to accept it. He turned and walked into the cabin without a word. Silas took off his hat and sat on the porch steps. We need a plan. The plan is, I leave, tonight. I take a horse, I ride north. And he follows you. And next time there's no ranch, no children to anchor you, no man standing between you and him. Then what? Then that's my problem. Wrong. You made it my problem the day my daughter dragged you into our lives. And I ain't sorry she did. Maggie sat down beside him, close but not touching. He'll bring the sheriff, Silas. He'll bring papers and witnesses and every man in town who owes him a drink or a favor. And the law will side with him because the law always sides with the husband. Maybe, maybe not. But the law ain't the only voice that matters in a town like this. What do you mean? I mean Denton Hollister can charm the preacher and the storekeeper. But there are other people in Dusty Creek. People who've seen what men like him do. People who stayed quiet because nobody asked them to speak. Maggie looked at him. Who? Ida Crawford. Maggie frowned. The woman who runs the boarding house. Widow Ida. Her husband Hector used to knock her around every Saturday night for 12 years. Whole town knew. Nobody said a word. When Hector finally dropped dead of apoplexy, Ida didn't shed a tear. She sold his saddle, bought the boarding house, and never looked back. You think she'd help? I think she'd burn the whole town down before she let another woman get dragged back to a man who hits her. Silas put his hat back on. And then there's Hank Mesa. The big rancher. Biggest spread in the territory. Hank's a hard man, but he's fair. He judges people by how they treat their horses. You beat a horse around Hank Mesa, you're done. He won't do business with you, won't shake your hand, won't spit on you if you're on fire. And if Denton beats his horse... Men like Denton always show their true colors around animals. They can't help it. The mask slips. Maggie pressed her palms together, thinking. So we don't run. We don't run. We stand. We stand. And we make sure when Denton shows his hand, there's enough people watching to see what he really is. She looked at him. Dust in his hair, sweat on his collar lines around his eyes, carved by grief and sun, and the stubborn refusal to quit. Not a handsome man by any magazine standard, but solid. True. The kind of man who said what he meant and stood where he planted himself. "I'm scared, Silas." "Good. Scared means you're smart. Only fools ain't afraid of men like Denton." "Are you afraid?" "Terrified." He almost smiled. "But I've been terrified before. It passes." That night after supper, after Ruby's letters, after Jesse pretended to sleep in the loft, while actually lying awake with his hand on his whittling knife, Maggie asked Silas something she'd been carrying for days. "Will you take me to Caroline's grave?" He went still. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "You don't have to," she said quickly. "I know it's sacred ground. I want to pay my respects to the woman who raised these children, who built this home. She deserves to know who's sleeping in her barn." Silas set down the cup. He was quiet so long, Maggie thought he'd refuse. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Early." They walked up the hill before the sun cleared the ridge. The grass was dry and yellow, crunching under their boots. Crickets sang in the sage. A wooden cross stood at the crest, weathered, but cared for. Silas had repainted it every spring. He knelt and placed his hand on the earth. His lips moved, but no sound came out. A private conversation with a woman 2 years gone. Maggie stood back, hands folded, giving him the space grief required. When he finally stood, his eyes were red but dry. "Go ahead." Maggie stepped forward. She didn't kneel. She stood straight facing the cross and spoke out loud in a voice that didn't waver. "Caroline, my name is Maggie. I came to your home with nothing, and your family gave me everything. Your husband is a good man, the best I've ever known. Your son is fierce and brave and loyal, just like you raised him to be. And your daughter—" Her voice caught. She pushed through. "Your daughter has your kindness. She reaches out to strangers without fear, and that's a gift that could only come from a mother who loved without condition." Silas's jaw was clenched so tight the muscles jumped. "I'm not here to replace you," Maggie continued. "Nobody could. But I want you to know that I'll take care of them. Not because I owe your husband. Because I love your children. Because they became mine the moment Ruby took my hand and Jesse stood in a barn at midnight and offered me your gun." Behind them, neither of them heard the small gasp. Jesse stood 20 feet back, having followed them up the hill. He'd heard everything. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't wipe them away. Maggie turned from the grave and saw the boy. Their eyes met. "I ain't calling you Mama," Jesse said, voice thick. "Not yet. You don't ever have to. But I might. Someday. If you stay." "I'm staying, Jesse." He nodded once, wiped his face with his sleeve. Then he walked forward past Maggie and knelt at his mother's cross. He pressed his forehead to the wood and whispered something only Caroline could hear. Silas put his arm around Maggie's shoulders. She leaned into him, and for one moment on that dry hill, with the whole territory stretched out beneath them, the world felt possible again. Then Jesse lifted his head. "Somebody's coming." They looked. A dust cloud on the road from town. 2 riders. Moving fast. Silas's hand dropped to the pistol on his hip. "Get the children inside." Maggie was already running. She reached the cabin as Ruby came out, the front door, doll in hand. "What's happening?" "Inside, sweetheart. Now." Maggie scooped her up and carried her through the door. She grabbed the shotgun from above the mantel, checked the load, and set it beside the window. Jesse burst through the door seconds later. He went straight for the cabinet behind the rifle case and pulled out his slingshot and a handful of stones. "Jesse, stay with Ruby. Don't come outside no matter what you hear." "But, no matter what, promise me." The boy's face twisted. Every instinct told him to fight. But he looked at Ruby shaking in the corner, clutching her doll, and he understood. Someone had to protect her. "I promise." Maggie touched his face. Then she walked outside with the shotgun and stood beside Silas on the porch. The riders came into view. Maggie's grip tightened on the stock. It wasn't Denton. It was Widow Ida Crawford, on a dappled mare riding hard, her gray hair streaming behind her like a flag. And beside her, on a black stallion that cost more than most men's homes, rode Hank Mesa, 6'4", barrel-chested, with a mustache that could have swept a saloon floor. They pulled up in a cloud of dust. Ida was off her horse before it fully stopped. "Silas Brannigan, I got news and it ain't good." Ida's voice was hard as iron. "That man from Kansas Hollister, he's been to the sheriff in Rawlins. Filed a legal claim for return of his wife. Sheriff's coming day after tomorrow with papers." Maggie's knees went weak. She leaned the shotgun against the porch rail so they wouldn't see her hands shake. Hank Mesa dismounted slow the way big men do. He looked at Maggie with eyes that missed nothing. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Hank Mesa. I own the spread north of here." He paused. "I also saw your husband's horse tied outside the hotel this morning. Fine animal. Tobiano paints 16 hands." "That's Dutch," Maggie said. "Denton's horse. Dutch has whip scars on his flanks. Fresh ones, under the saddle blanket where most people wouldn't look." Hank's jaw tightened. I looked. Ida stepped onto the porch and took Maggie's hands. Her grip was fierce, her eyes fiercer. "I know what he did to you, girl. I don't need to see papers or hear sermons. I can see it in the way you stand like you're ready to run or fight and you ain't decided which." She squeezed hard. "I stood the same way for 12 years. I ain't letting it happen to someone else." Maggie's chin trembled. "He has medical documents. He has the preacher. He has lies." Ida's voice cut like a blade. "And lies melt in the sun if you hold them up long enough. I already sent a letter to a woman I know in Abilene. Sally Fenwick runs the boarding house there. If your husband's the man you say he is, Sally'll know. She knows every bruise in that town." Hank Mesa crossed his arms. "Sheriff from Rawlins is a fair man. Name's Tom Buckley. He won't just hand a woman over without hearing both sides. But he will follow the law, and the law says a wife belongs to her husband." "Then the law is wrong," Jesse said from the doorway. Every adult turned. The boy stood with his slingshot in his hand and fire in his eyes. "Jesse, get inside," Silas said. "No, sir. You told me a man stands up when something's wrong. You said that's who Mama raised me to be. Well, I'm standing." Hank Mesa looked at the boy for a long time. Then he looked at Silas. "That's your son. That's my son. He's got grit." Hank turned to Maggie. "Ma'am, I can't stop the law, but I can make sure the law sees the truth. When that sheriff comes, I'll be here, and I'll bring every rancher in this valley who's ever seen a horse with whip marks and known what kind of man holds the other end." Ida nodded. "And I'll be here with every woman who ever got told to go home and be a better wife while she was bleeding from the mouth." Maggie looked at these people, strangers, a week ago soldiers now, fighting for a woman they barely knew because they recognized the war she'd been surviving alone. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Ida's face softened. "Because 30 years ago, I was you. And nobody came. Nobody stood on my porch and said, 'Enough.' I buried that woman the day Hector died, but she ain't gone. She's standing right here looking at you saying what nobody said to her." She gripped Maggie's hands tighter. "Enough." Maggie broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. She just bent forward and pressed her forehead to Ida's shoulder and let the sobs come, great heaving silent sobs that shook her whole body. 8 years of them. Every blow absorbed every scream, swallowed every tear forbidden. They all came flooding out on a stranger's shoulder on a porch in Wyoming. Ida held her. Didn't shush her. Didn't pat her back. Didn't say it was going to be all right. Just held her and let her grieve. Silas turned away, blinking hard. Hank Mesa studied the horizon with sudden, intense interest. Jesse stood in the doorway and watched Maggie cry. He thought about his mama, about the day she died, how his daddy had carried her out of the cabin, wrapped in the wildflower quilt, how he'd told Jesse to be brave, how Jesse had promised, and then broke that promise every single night for 2 years, crying into his pillow where nobody could hear. He walked forward past his father, past Hank Mesa, and put his hand on Maggie's arm. She lifted her head. Her face was wrecked and raw and beautiful with grief. "You ain't alone," Jessie said. "Not anymore. That's a Brannigan promise, and we don't break those." Maggie pulled the boy close, held him against her chest, felt his heart beating against her ribs fast and young and fierce. From the cabin window, Ruby watched with her face pressed to the glass. She didn't understand everything that was happening. But she understood this: the people she loved were holding each other, and that meant they were going to be okay. She picked up her slate board and, carefully in letters Maggie had taught her, wrote 4 words: S-A-F-E. F-A-M-I-L-Y. She held it up to the window so everyone could see, but nobody was looking. That was all right. The words were true, whether anyone read them or not. Hank Mesa mounted his horse. 2 days. I'll be back with reinforcements. Ida straightened her skirts. I'll ride to the telegraph office. Sally Fenwick's letter can't wait for the mail. They rode out the way they came, hard and fast and purposeful. Silas and Maggie stood on the porch watching the dust settle. Jessie sat on the steps between them, whittling a new stick, already sharpening it to a point. 2 days, Silas said. 2 days, Maggie repeated. Somewhere down the road toward town, a man with polished boots and a charming smile was loading his revolver and practicing the speech he'd give the sheriff about his poor, troubled wife. He had the law. He had papers. He had God's own preacher in his pocket. But he didn't have the one thing that mattered most. He didn't have the truth. And in 2 days, the truth was going to stand on this porch and look him dead in the eye. Maggie reached down and took Jessie's hand. The boy didn't pull away. She was done running. The first day passed like a held breath. Maggie couldn't sit still. She scrubbed the cabin floor twice, reorganized the pantry 3 times, and mended every piece of clothing she could find, including a shirt of Silas's that didn't need mending. Her hands needed work, the way her lungs needed air. Without it, the fear crept in. Jessie stayed close. He didn't say much, but he positioned himself between Maggie and the road all day, whittling on the porch with his eyes fixed on the horizon. Every dust cloud made his shoulders tighten. Every distant hoofbeat made his hand drift toward the slingshot in his back pocket. Ruby sensed the tension the way children do, not through understanding, but through the skin. She grew quieter, clingier, pressing herself against Maggie's leg while she cooked, holding Jessie's hand when they walked to the well. "Why is everybody scared?" she asked at supper. Silas looked at Maggie. Maggie looked at Silas. "We're not scared, baby," Maggie said. "We're just being careful." "Is it because of the man Papa went to see in town?" Jessie's fork stopped. Silas set down his coffee. "What do you know about that Ruby girl?" Silas asked gently. "I heard Ms. Ida talking. She said a bad man is coming. Is he coming here?" Maggie knelt beside Ruby's chair. "There's a man who says I belong to him. He's wrong, but he's going to try to take me away." Ruby's eyes went huge and wet. "No. It's going to be okay." "No." Ruby grabbed Maggie's arm with both hands. "You can't go. You promised you'd teach me all the letters. We only got to P. You can't go before Z." Maggie's heart cracked clean in half. She pulled Ruby close and held her tight. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise. Brannigan, promise." Maggie looked at Silas over the child's head. He nodded. "Brannigan, promise," Maggie whispered. That night, nobody slept well. Silas sat by the window, rifle across his knees. Maggie lay in the barn loft, derringer in hand, listening. Jesse lay rigid in his bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every scenario his 10-year-old mind could construct. Only Ruby slept. She'd crawled into Maggie's lap after supper and refused to let go until Silas carried her to bed. She fell asleep, clutching the slate board with SAFE written across it like a talisman against the dark. Dawn came slow and hot. The second day. Silas was checking the rifle loads when hoofbeats sounded from the north. He grabbed the gun and stepped onto the porch. Maggie appeared from the barn, shotgun ready. It was Hank Mesa. Behind him rode 4 men ranchers from the valley, sun-hardened and stone-faced. They dismounted in the yard without ceremony. "Brought who I could," Hank said. Tom Mercer from the Double Bar, Sam Youngblood from the Creek Spread, Pete Dawkins and his boy Caleb. Silas shook each man's hand. "Appreciate it." Tom Mercer, a lean man with white hair and a limp from a horse fall 10 years back, looked at Maggie. "Ma'am, Hank told us your situation. I want you to know my wife was raised by a man who used his fists. She don't talk about it. But when I told her where I was going today, she packed me 2 days of food and said if I came home without helping you, I shouldn't come home at all." Maggie's throat closed. "Thank you." Sam Youngblood, barely 25 and built like a fence post, pulled a folded paper from his vest. "This might help. I was in Abilene 2 years ago. Saw a woman outside Hollister's saloon, with her arm in a sling. She was crying. Hollister came out, grabbed her by the hair and dragged her back inside. I didn't do nothing about it then." His jaw worked. "Been living with that ever since. So I wrote it down. What I saw when I saw it, signed and dated." He handed the paper to Silas. "That woman," Maggie said quietly. "Was she small? Red hair?" "Yes, ma'am." "That was Jenny Polk. She worked at the saloon. She disappeared a month later. Denton told everyone she ran off with a cattle buyer." Maggie's voice was flat. Nobody questioned it. Silence sat heavy over the yard. Every man looked at his boots. The weight of what they were dealing with settled onto shoulders that already carried plenty. Ida Crawford arrived an hour later, driving a buckboard at a speed that should have killed her. She hauled back on the reins and jumped down with the energy of a woman half her age. "Got it." She waved a telegram. Sally Fenwick came through. 3 women in Abilene willing to swear Denton Hollister beat his wife. Names, dates, injuries they witnessed. Sally's sending a full letter by express post, but this telegram names them and their statements. Maggie took the telegram with trembling hands. She read it twice. 3 names she recognized, women who'd seen the bruises, heard the screams through the walls, brought her cold cloths for her black eyes, and said nothing, because Denton Hollister owned half the town, and fear owned the other half. "They're speaking now," Maggie whispered. "After all this time." Sally said the moment she asked, they lined up, said they'd been waiting for someone to ask. Ida gripped Maggie's shoulder. "You weren't the only one he silenced, girl. You were just the first one brave enough to run." Maggie pressed the telegram to her chest and closed her eyes. 8 years of being told she was crazy. 8 years of being told nobody would believe her. And now 3 women she'd thought had abandoned her were standing up from 500 miles away. She opened her eyes. They were dry and burning. "When's the sheriff coming?" "Noon," Hank said. "Give or take." Silas checked the sun. "That's 3 hours. Then we get ready." They spent those 3 hours preparing not with guns, but with truth. Silas laid out the evidence on the porch table. Sam Youngblood's written account, Ida's telegram, Maggie's scars. Hank Mesa positioned his ranchers around the yard, not as a show of force, but as a wall of witnesses. Maggie changed into the cleanest dress she had. She washed her face, tied back her short hair, and stood straight. She looked at herself in the cabin's small mirror, thin, scarred, bruised along the jawline where Denton's last blow was still fading to yellow. "You look strong," Silas said from behind her. "I look like a woman who's been hit." "That's what strong looks like sometimes." She turned to him. "Silas, if this doesn't work, it'll work. If it doesn't, if the sheriff takes me, I need you to know." She pressed her lips together, fighting for control. "These 2 weeks have been the best of my life. Every single day. Even the hard ones. Even the scared ones. Because for the first time in 8 years, someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a problem." Silas crossed the room. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, close enough to touch, but not touching, respecting the space she needed. "Maggie Hollister, I ain't letting anyone take you off this land. Not today. Not ever. And when this is done, When that man is gone and the dust settles, I got something I want to say to you, something I should have said days ago. Say it now. Not yet. I want to say it when you're free, when it means something more than words spoken out of fear. Her eyes searched his face. She nodded slowly. Then you better make sure I'm still here tonight. Count on it. Hoofbeats. Coming from town. Multiple riders. Jessie burst through the door. They're here. Maggie's hands shook. Once. She clenched them into fists, and they stopped. She walked out onto the porch and stood beside Silas. Jessie flanked her right side. Ruby, despite every adult's objection, had planted herself on the porch step and refused to move, arms, crossed chin, out a 6-year-old fortress of stubbornness. Ruby inside, Silas said. No, sir. Ruby. Maggie stays, I stay. That's final. Silas looked at Maggie. She almost smiled. She gets it from you, Maggie said. Lord help us all, Silas muttered. 3 riders came into the yard. Sheriff Tom Buckley rode in front, a thick man with a gray mustache and a badge that caught the sun. Behind him rode Reverend Whitfield Bible, clutched to his chest like a shield. And behind them both, on a beautiful Tobiano paint with whip scars hidden under the saddle blanket, rode Denton Hollister. He'd dressed for the occasion. Clean black coat, white shirt, string tie. His boots gleamed. His smile was in place, warm concern, the patient suffering of a loving husband, wronged by fate and feminine madness. Maggie's stomach turned to ice. She knew that smile. She'd seen it 1,000 times right before the door closed and the real Denton emerged. Stand tall, Ida whispered from behind her. Maggie stood tall. Sheriff Buckley dismounted and swept his eyes across the yard, the ranchers positioned along the fence, the women on the porch, the children planted like trees. His mustache twitched. Well, he said, got ourselves a gathering. Sheriff. Silas stepped down from the porch. Appreciate you coming out. Didn't have much choice. Got a legal claim filed by Mr. Hollister here for the return of his wife. Buckley pulled a folded document from his vest. Margaret Hollister née Cowan, married to Denton Hollister in Abilene, Kansas, 1870. Mr. Hollister claims his wife fled the marital home without cause and is being harbored on your property. That's accurate, Denton said, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who owned every room he entered. And I want to say, Sheriff, I don't blame Mr. Brannigan. Maggie can be very convincing. She's unwell and she needs... You'll get your turn, Buckley cut in. I like to hear from the woman first. Denton's smile held, but his eyes flickered. This wasn't part of his script. Buckley looked at Maggie. Ma'am, you are Margaret Hollister. I am. And that man is your legal husband. He is. He says you left without cause. Is that true? Maggie stepped off the porch. She walked across the yard until she stood 10 feet from Denton, close enough to see the vein in his temple pulse, close enough to smell the cologne that used to mean pain was coming. I left because he would have killed me, she said. Denton shook his head with rehearsed sadness. Sheriff, this is exactly what I warned you about. The delusions. Roll up your sleeves, Denton. Silence. Denton blinked. I beg your pardon? You heard me? Maggie's voice carried across the yard. Roll up your sleeves. Show the sheriff your knuckles. Show him the scars on your right hand where you split your skin open on my cheekbone last March. Denton's smile wavered. This is absurd. Then show them. Maggie turned to the sheriff. His right hand, knuckles. He wraps them sometimes, but the scars are there. A man who hits a woman hard enough to break her cheekbone doesn't walk away unmarked. Buckley looked at Denton. Sir, would you mind? I most certainly would mind. This is a circus. My wife is mentally... Just the hands, Mr. Hollister. Shouldn't take but a second if there's nothing to see. Denton went still. The charm drained from his face like water from a cracked jug. What was left underneath was something cold, something calculating, something that every person in that yard recognized instantly. The mask was slipping. He held out his hands, slowly rolled his sleeves. His left hand was clean. His right hand, the knuckles were ridged with scar tissue. Old breaks healed crooked. The kind of damage that comes from hitting something hard, repeatedly. Buckley studied the hand. His mustache twitched again. "Those are some knuckles, Mr. Hollister. I'm a saloon owner. Bar fights are part of the business." "Uh-huh." Buckley turned to Maggie. "Ma'am, you said cheekbone." Maggie turned her face to the light. Along her left cheekbone, faded but visible, ran a thin scar where the bone had cracked and healed uneven. She touched it with one finger. "March 14th, a Thursday. He came home drunk and asked why dinner was cold. I told him I'd been sick. He hit me with a closed fist. I heard the bone crack. He told me I'd fallen against the stove." Denton took a step forward. "Maggie, sweetheart, you're confused. You know the doctor said, 'Don't call me sweetheart.'" Her voice hit like a whip crack. "Don't you ever call me that again. You lost that right the first time you put your hands on me. And every time after. Every single time." Denton's composure fractured. Just for a second. His upper lip curled, his hands clenched, and something savage flashed through his eyes. The real man, the one behind the smile, surfaced for one unguarded heartbeat. Sheriff Buckley saw it. So did every rancher in the yard. "Mr. Hollister," Buckley said carefully, "I've also received some additional information. A written account from a Mr. Sam Youngblood stating he witnessed you physically assault a woman at your saloon in Abilene 2 years ago." Denton spun toward the ranchers. His eyes found Sam Youngblood and narrowed. "That man is a liar. There's also a telegram," Buckley continued, "from 3 women in Abilene: Catherine Briggs, Louisa Phelps, and Dorothy Yates, each stating they personally witnessed injuries on your wife, consistent with severe and repeated beatings." The color drained from Denton's face. He turned to Reverend Whitfield. "Reverend, tell him about the medical papers. Tell him she's Mr. Hollister." Buckley's voice hardened. "I've been a lawman for 22 years. I've seen hysterical women. I've also seen beaten women. And I've learned to tell the difference." He turned to Maggie. "Ma'am, I can't dissolve a marriage. That's for a judge. But I can tell you that based on the evidence before me, I see no grounds to compel you to return to Mr. Hollister's custody. You are free to remain where you choose." Maggie's knees buckled. Ida caught her, held her upright. "This is outrageous." Denton stepped forward, finger jabbing the air. "She is my wife. I have legal—" "You have the right to file with a judge in Rawlins," Buckley said. "And that judge will see the same evidence I just saw. Plus I reckon a few more things that might surface between now and then." Denton's mask shattered completely. The charming husband, the worried spouse, the reasonable man, all of it fell away, and what stood in that yard was the thing Maggie had lived with for 8 years. His face twisted with rage, his body coiled, his voice dropped to a hiss. "You stupid woman!" He took a step toward Maggie. "You think these people can protect you? You think running to some dirt farmer and his brats is going to save you? I own you, Maggie. I've always owned you. And when these fools get tired of your act, you'll come crawling back. You always do." "That's enough," Silas said, stepping between them. Denton shoved him. Hard. Silas stumbled back a step, caught himself, and stood firm. He didn't swing, didn't shout, just stood there solid as the mountains behind him, blocking Denton's path to Maggie. "Move," Denton snarled. "No. She's my property. The law. She ain't property." Silas's voice was low, steady, and final. "She's a human being. And you don't get to touch her. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever again." Denton reached for his hip. His coat swept back. The handle of a revolver gleamed. 3 things happened at once. Jesse stepped off the porch with his mother's derringer raised in both hands, aimed square at Denton's chest. His arms were shaking. His eyes were not. Hank Mesa drew his own pistol with the speed of a man who'd been handling firearms since before Denton was born, and Sheriff Buckley put his hand on Denton's arm and said very quietly, "Don't." Denton froze. His hand hovered near the revolver. His eyes swept the yard. The ranchers, the sheriff, the boy with the gun, the big man with the bigger gun, and for the first time, he understood that he was outnumbered, out-truthed, beaten by the very thing he'd spent 8 years destroying. A woman who refused to stay silent. "Take your hand off the gun," Buckley said. Denton's hand dropped, but his eyes found Maggie, and in them burned a promise that made her blood go cold. "Jesse," Maggie said firmly. "Put it down." The boy didn't move. His aim held steady on Denton's heart. "Jesse, look at me." He looked. Tears were streaming down his face, but his hands didn't waver. "Put it down, baby. He's not worth it. He's not worth the cost of the bullet." Jesse lowered the derringer. His whole body shook as the adrenaline released. Silas crossed to him in 3 strides and wrapped his arms around the boy, pulling him close, pressing his face into his chest. "I got you, son. I got you." Jesse broke. He sobbed into his father's shirt, great heaving 10-year-old sobs that held 2 years of grief, and 30 seconds of terror, and the terrible weight of almost becoming something he wasn't. Buckley took Denton's revolver. "Mr. Hollister, you're coming back to town with me. You can collect your belongings at the hotel and be out of this territory by sundown tomorrow. If I see you within 10 miles of this ranch again, I'll arrest you for threatening behavior." Denton straightened his coat. The smile was back, but it was damaged now, cracked at the edges, and everyone could see the rot underneath. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is." Ida Crawford stepped forward, all 5 feet 2 inches of her vibrating with righteous fury. "And if it ain't, I got a telegraph wire to every newspaper between here and Kansas City. How do you think your saloon business holds up when every woman in 3 states knows what you do behind closed doors?" Denton stared at her. For the first time, something like fear crossed his face. "Get on your horse," Buckley said. Denton mounted. He looked down at Maggie one last time. She met his gaze without flinching, without trembling, without looking away. 8 years she'd dropped her eyes when he stared at her. 8 years she'd made herself small, made herself quiet, made herself invisible to survive. Not today. "Goodbye, Denton," she said. He jerked the reins and rode out of the yard. Buckley followed, keeping a horse length behind. Reverend Whitfield, white-faced and silent, trailed after them both. He hadn't spoken a single word since the evidence came out. His Bible hung loose at his side like a weapon he'd forgotten how to use. They watched until the dust settled and the road was empty. Then Maggie sat down on the porch steps, put her face in her hands and wept. Not the silent tears she'd cried on Ida's shoulder. Not the controlled grief she'd shown at Caroline's grave. This was the ugly, broken, full-body weeping of a woman releasing 8 years of captivity in a single moment. She shook and gasped and made sounds that weren't words, sounds that came from a place deeper than language. Ruby climbed into her lap, just crawled right in, wrapped her small arms around Maggie's neck and held on. "Don't cry, Maggie. The bad man is gone." "I know, sweetheart." "Is he coming back?" Maggie looked at Silas. He stood at the bottom of the steps, Jesse still pressed against his side, his hand on his son's shoulder. "No," Silas said. "He ain't coming back." One by one the ranchers mounted up. Tom Mercer tipped his hat. Sam Youngblood nodded. Pete Dawkins and his boy Caleb rode out without a word, the way men do when they've done something decent and don't need praise for it. Hank Mesa was last. He dismounted one more time and walked to Maggie. He pulled something from his saddlebag, a folded document. "This is a deed of employment," he said. "Says Margaret Hollister is employed as a domestic worker on the Brannigan Ranch with wages rights and legal standing as a resident of Wyoming Territory. I had my lawyer draft it this morning. It ain't much, but it gives you legal grounds to be here that go beyond marriage claims." Maggie took the document. Her hands were still shaking. She read it twice, then looked up at Hank Mesa with eyes so full of gratitude the big man had to look away. "Why?" she asked. The same question she kept asking, the same question that kept getting answered. "Because my mama was a small woman too," Hank said quietly. "And my daddy was a big man with hard fists. She never got out. Died in that house when I was 12. I couldn't save her." He mounted his horse. "But I can make damn sure I don't stand by twice." He rode out. Ida stayed. She made coffee, heated stew, fussed over the children, and bullied Silas into eating something. She cleaned the kitchen like she owned it all the while, talking in a steady stream about nothing important: the price of flour, the weather, the new family that had moved into the old Perkins place, giving everyone's nerves time to unknot. When she finally left, she hugged Maggie on the porch, long and hard. "You did good today, girl." I was terrified. "Course you were. Brave don't mean you ain't scared. Brave means you're scared and you stand up anyway." She pulled back and held Maggie at arm's length. "You got a home now. Don't let nobody, not Denton Hollister, not a preacher, not the law, not your own fear, take it from you." She climbed onto her buckboard and rattled away into the fading light. The yard emptied. The dust settled. Evening crept in soft and warm. Jesse sat on the porch whittling. His hands had stopped shaking an hour ago, but he hadn't let go of the stick since. Shaping it calmed him, the way praying calmed some people. Maggie sat beside him. "You scared me today." "I scared myself." "You pointed a gun at a grown man, Jesse." "He was going for his. If I hadn't—" "I know. But promise me something." He looked at her. "Promise me you'll let the adults handle the guns from now on. You've got too much life ahead of you to carry that kind of weight." "Mama carried a gun." "Your mama carried a Derringer for protection. There's a difference between being ready and going looking for a fight." She put her hand on his arm. "You protected me today. You and your daddy and Ruby and every person who showed up in this yard. I will never forget that as long as I live. But I need you to be a boy, Jesse. Just for a little while longer. The world needs men like you, but it needs you to get there in one piece." Jesse was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the Derringer. He held it out to Maggie. "You keep it. I don't need it anymore." She took the gun, looked at it, looked at the boy who'd carried his dead mother's weapon like a torch against the darkness. "Your mama would be proud of you," she said. "You think so?" "I know so." He almost smiled. Almost. The edges of his mouth twitched, and for a split second she saw the boy he'd been before. Grief rewired him. Bright-eyed, gap-toothed, ready to laugh. He'd get back there. She'd make sure of it. Ruby fell asleep on Maggie's lap on the porch, one hand clutching Maggie's collar, the other wrapped around her slate board. Silas carried her to bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead. Jesse climbed to the loft without being told. At the top of the ladder, he paused. "Maggie." "Yeah." "Sleep inside tonight. There's room by the stove." Maggie's breath caught. Jesse, the boy who'd said she'd never set foot in this house as anything but help, was inviting her in? "You sure?" "The barn loft's got spiders. Ruby'll worry." He shrugged as if it were nothing, as if he hadn't just opened a door he'd sworn would stay locked forever. "All right," Maggie said. "Thank you, Jesse." He disappeared into the loft. She heard him settle into his blankets, heard the familiar scratch of his knife on wood, one last whittle before sleep. She stood on the porch, looking at the road one final time. Empty. Still. Just heat shimmer and dust and the fading call of a meadowlark. Denton was gone. For now. Maybe forever. Maybe not. But tonight, this porch was hers. This family was hers. And she wasn't going to waste a second of it being afraid. She went inside. Silas was banking the fire. He looked up when she came through the door. "Jesse invited me in," she said. "I heard." His voice was thick, That boy. That boy is something special. He gets it from his mama. He gets it from both of you." Silas straightened. They stood on opposite sides of the cabin firelight between them, and everything they hadn't said filled the space like smoke. Maggie. "Yeah. You're free now. I know. So I'm going to say what I wanted to say earlier." He took a breath. "Stay. Not as help. Not as a hired hand. Not as somebody who sleeps in the barn and earns her keep. Stay, because this is your home. Because those children love you. Because I—" His voice broke. He pressed his fist to his mouth, steadied himself. "Because I love you, and I'm done pretending I don't." Maggie crossed the room. She stood in front of him, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his eyes, close enough to count the lines that grief and sun had carved into his face. "Say it again," she whispered. "I love you, Maggie." She put her hands on his face, rough palms against rough stubble. Two people who'd been broken by the world and rebuilt themselves from the wreckage. "I love you too, Silas Brannigan. God help me, I do." He kissed her, gentle, careful the way a man handles something precious he's afraid might shatter. She kissed him back, and it wasn't gentle at all. It was fierce and desperate and full of every moment she'd spent believing she'd never be touched with kindness again. From the loft, the soft sound of whittling stopped. Jesse smiled in the dark and rolled over to face the wall. About time, he thought, and closed his eyes. Maggie woke on the cabin floor beside the stove, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cedar and wood smoke. For 3 full seconds, she didn't know where she was. Then she heard Ruby's breathing from the loft, Jesse's soft snore, and the creak of Silas's boots on the porch outside. She pressed her hand to her lips. She could still feel him there. She sat up, folded the blanket, and opened the cabin door. Silas stood at the porch rail, coffee in hand, watching the sun come up. He turned when he heard her, and something in his face had changed overnight, a looseness around the jaw, a steadiness in the eyes. Like a man who'd set down a weight he'd been carrying so long, he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his body. "Morning," he said. "Morning. Sleep all right?" "Best I've slept in 8 years." He handed her his coffee. She took a sip and handed it back. Their fingers touched on the tin cup, and neither one of them pulled away. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live." She almost laughed. "Just like that. Just like that. One day at a time. Same as we've been doing, except now I don't have to pretend I ain't watching you when you cross the yard." "You were watching me." "Maggie, I've been watching you since the day you sat in the dirt in Dusty Creek and ate a biscuit like it was the last meal on earth." He set down the coffee. "I just didn't have the guts to say why." She leaned against the porch rail beside him. Their shoulders touched. "Silas, I need to tell you something." "All right. I'm still married, legally. Until a judge says otherwise, I'm Denton Hollister's wife. And in this territory, that means, I know what it means. It means I can't. Maggie." He turned to face her. "I waited 2 years to feel something again. I can wait a little longer for a piece of paper. It could take months. A judge in Rollins' filings testimony. Then it takes months. I ain't going anywhere. Are you?" She looked at him. This man who'd given her water when she was dying, work when she was desperate, shelter when she was hunted, and love when she'd forgotten it existed. "No," she said. "I ain't going anywhere." Ruby's face appeared at the loft window. "Are y'all kissing again?" Maggie's face went crimson. Silas choked on his coffee. "Go back to bed, Ruby," Silas managed. "I can't. I'm too happy." She disappeared from the window, and they heard her shaking Jesse awake. "Jesse, wake up. Maggie's staying forever. Papa said so." Jesse's groggy voice drifted down. "I know. I heard him last night. Now let me sleep." Maggie buried her face in her hands. Silas rubbed the back of his neck, ears red as barn paint. For a moment they were just two people embarrassed by children who heard too much, and the ordinariness of it, the sheer domestic normalcy, hit Maggie so hard she had to sit down. This is what it's supposed to feel like, she thought. This is what I was fighting for. The first week after Denton's departure passed in a strange, tender quiet. Maggie moved her things from the barn to the cabin, not much, just her bundle and the derringer and Caroline's pillow. Silas cleared a space beside the stove, built a proper bed frame from pine boards, and set it up without being asked. Jessie helped. Held the boards while Silas nailed. Didn't say anything about it. Didn't need to. Ruby decorated the bed frame with wildflowers, tucked into every joint and crevice. "So you dream about pretty things," she explained. Maggie knelt and hugged her so tight the girl squeaked. But the peace didn't hold. It never does, not completely. Not when a man like Denton Hollister has been told no for the first time in his life. 10 days after the sheriff escorted him out of the territory, a letter arrived at Taggart's store. Earl, whose conscience had been eating him alive since Hank Mesa's visit, wrote it out to the ranch himself. He handed it to Silas on the porch with shaking hands. "It's from a lawyer in Abilene," Earl said. "Addressed to Maggie." Silas took the letter. "You read it?" Earl flushed. "It was open when it arrived, I swear." "Get off my property, Earl." Earl mounted up and rode away without argument. Some debts take more than one gesture to repay. Silas brought the letter inside. Maggie read it at the kitchen table, while the children played outside. Her face went white, then gray, then something beyond color. "He's contesting," she said. "Denton hired a lawyer. He's filing for legal return of marital property. That's what he's calling me. Marital property." She set the letter down. "He's also claiming I stole $200 from his saloon the night I left. He wants me arrested for theft." "Did you take money?" $12, from the cash box. I needed it to eat." "12 ain't 200. Denton don't need the truth, Silas. He needs a story, and a judge in Kansas who owes him favors." Silas sat across from her. "Then we get our own lawyer. With what money we can barely afford flour. Hank Mesa offered to help. I'll ride to his spread tomorrow." "I can't take his money." "It ain't charity, Maggie. It's an investment. Hank said so himself. He wants Denton Hollister to know that Wyoming ain't Kansas, that women here don't belong to the men who hit them." Maggie pressed her palms flat on the table. She stared at the wood grain, tracing the lines with her eyes. "I'm so tired of fighting." "I know. Every time I think it's over, he reaches out and pulls me back, like a rope around my neck. I cut it, and he ties another one." Silas reached across the table and covered her hands with his. "Then we cut faster than he ties." She looked up. His eyes were steady. Not angry, not afraid, just there. Present, solid. The man who showed up and stayed, no matter what, rode in from the horizon. "All right," she said. "We fight." Silas rode to Hank Mesa's spread the next morning. He came back that afternoon with a name, Arthur Crane, a lawyer in Rawlins, who'd handled property disputes and divorcement cases for ranch wives across the territory. Hank was covering the fees. "I don't want his money," Maggie said. "He don't want your pride," Silas replied. "He wants justice. There's a difference. Let the man help." She swallowed her objections because Silas was right and because she couldn't afford to be proud anymore. Pride was a luxury for people who weren't being hunted by their own husbands. Arthur Crane arrived 3 days later. A thin man in a rumpled suit with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that sat crooked on his nose. He looked like a schoolteacher. He talked like a cannon. "Mrs. Hollister, I've reviewed the facts as presented by Mr. Mesa and Mrs. Crawford. I've also received the full letter from Sally Fenwick in Abilene, which includes sworn testimony from 3 witnesses. Additionally, I've obtained the original medical report from Dr. Albright." He pulled a document from his satchel. "Interesting reading. Dr. Albright diagnosed you with, and I quote, hysteria of the feminine variety presenting with delusion, melancholia, and tendency towards self-injury. This diagnosis was made on a single visit in which you presented with a dislocated shoulder. That's correct? A dislocated shoulder that Dr. Albright, according to his own notes, attributed to a domestic fall. Crane looked over his spectacles. Mrs. Hollister, I've been a lawyer for 19 years. I've seen a lot of domestic falls. They tend to happen most often in homes where the husband has scarred knuckles and the wife has broken bones. Can you get me free of him? I can do better than that. Wyoming Territory has some of the most progressive laws in the nation regarding women's rights. Women here can own property, file lawsuits, and crucially petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. I intend to file on your behalf within the week. Maggie's hands gripped the edge of the table. Denton will fight it. Let him. His lawyer is filing in Kansas where the laws favor the husband. I'm filing in Wyoming where they don't. Jurisdiction matters, Mrs. Hollister. And right now, jurisdiction is on our side. What about the theft charge? $200 alleged stolen from a saloon cash box. No witnesses. No police report filed at the time of the alleged theft. Mr. Hollister waited until his wife fled to report it, which suggests it's retaliatory, not factual. Any judge worth his salt will see through it. Maggie let out a breath she'd been holding for days. How long? 3 months. Maybe 4. The wheels of justice turn slow, but they do turn. And in the meantime, you stay here. You work. You build a life. And you let me handle Denton Hollister. Crane folded his documents. I should warn you, he'll try other things before this reaches a courtroom. Letters, threats, intermediaries. Men like him don't stop because the law tells them to. They stop when they realize the cost of continuing exceeds the satisfaction of control. What do I do when he tries? You document everything. Every letter, every visitor, every threat. You tell Mr. Brannigan. You tell Mrs. Crawford, you tell me. You build a wall of evidence so high that when we walk into that courtroom, Denton Hollister's charming smile won't be worth the teeth it's printed on. Crane shook her hand, shook Silas's hand, tipped his hat to the children, and rode back to Rollins with a satchel full of testimony and the grim determination of a man who'd seen too many women lose and was tired of it. 2 weeks later, the first letter arrived. It was addressed to Maggie, postmarked Abilene. No return address, but she knew the handwriting like she knew her own scars. She opened it at the kitchen table. Silas sat across from her. Jessie and Ruby were outside feeding the chickens. My dearest Margaret, she read aloud, I forgive you for what you've done. I know you were frightened and confused. I want you to know that I've changed. I've spoken to Reverend Mills and he has helped me see the error of my ways. Come home, Maggie. I miss your cooking. I miss your singing. I miss you beside me at night. I'm a better man now. Your loving husband, Denton. She set the letter down. Her hands were steady. He's changed, she said flatly. A new man. Reverend approved. Silas waited. He wrote this same letter after the first time he hit me. Word for word. I know because I kept that one too. Same handwriting, same lies, same, I miss your cooking, like I was a kitchen appliance he'd misplaced. She picked up the letter and held it over the lamp flame. The paper caught, curled, blackened. She dropped it into the stove. Document that. The second letter came a week later. This one wasn't gentle. Margaret, you have embarrassed me in front of the entire territory. You have stolen from me, slandered me, and turned strangers against me. I am your husband before God and the law. If you do not return willingly, I will use every legal means at my disposal to bring you home. You know what happens when you defy me. Don't test my patience. D.H. Maggie read this one, silently folded it, and handed it to Silas. For the lawyer. You all right? I've been reading letters like this for 8 years. The words don't hit as hard when you're not trapped in the same house with the man writing them. But that night she checked the locks 3 times. Old habits die harder than old husbands. The third letter didn't come to Maggie. It came to Silas. Mr. Brannigan, you have inserted yourself into a private marital matter. I am a patient man, but my patience has limits. Return my wife or face consequences. I know where your children sleep. D.H. Silas read it once. His face didn't change. He folded it carefully, placed it in the envelope, and walked to Hank Mesa's spread. He returned 3 hours later. Hank's sending 2 of his ranch hands to camp on our property until this is settled, armed. He threatened the children. He made a mistake. Silas's voice was calm, but his eyes were black with a fury that went deeper than anger. You threaten a man's kids in this territory, you don't get a lawsuit. You get buried. Silas, don't. I ain't going to do anything stupid, but I ain't going to pretend those words don't exist either. Crane's adding it to the file. A man who threatens children in writing is a man who just handed us the case. He was right. When Arthur Crane received the letter, he smiled the grim smile of a lawyer who's just been dealt a winning hand by his opponent's stupidity. Threatening minor children, Crane said. In writing, signed with his initials. Mr. Hollister just made my job considerably easier. The court date was set for September. 3 months of waiting, working, and building the life Denton was trying to destroy. Maggie threw herself into the ranch. The garden exploded under her hands. Tomatoes, beans, squash, corn, herbs that made the cabin smell like something worth coming home to. She mended every fence, patched every roof hole, and taught Ruby her letters all the way to Z. The day Ruby wrote her own name for the first time, R-U-B-Y, crooked but clear on the slate board. Maggie cried, not from sadness, from the overwhelming, bone-deep joy of watching a child she loved accomplish something that mattered. Don't cry, Maggie, it's just letters. It's never just letters, sweetheart. Letters are how we tell the world who we are. Jesse was changing too. The hard shell he'd built around himself was cracking, not breaking, cracking, letting light in through the gaps. He started talking at supper. Really talking, not just grunting. He told stories about school, about the horses, about the time he'd seen a bear in the north pasture and stood his ground until it walked away. Weren't you scared? Ruby asked. Course I was, but scared don't mean run. Scared means pay attention. Maggie caught Silas's eye across the table. He raised an eyebrow. She smiled. The boy was going to be all right. One evening in August, Jesse came to Maggie while she was washing dishes. He stood in the kitchen doorway, hands in his pockets, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Can I ask you something? Always. When you go to court, in Rollins, for the divorce. Yeah. Can I come? Maggie set down the dish. Why? Because I want to look at him. Jesse's jaw tightened. I want to look at the man who hurt you, and I want him to see me. I want him to know that you've got family now, real family, not the kind that hits you and calls it love. Maggie's vision blurred. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You'll have to ask your daddy. I already did. He said it's up to you. She looked at this boy, this fierce, wounded, extraordinary boy who'd gone from wanting her gone to wanting to stand beside her in a courtroom, who'd offered her his dead mother's gun and then laid it down when she asked, who'd opened a locked door and let her walk through. Yes, she said. You can come. Jesse nodded, almost smiled, then turned and walked away, hands still in his pockets, whistling a tune that Maggie recognized after 3 notes. Amazing Grace. The boy had been listening all along. September came with cooler mornings and golden light. Silas drove the wagon to Rollins with Maggie beside him on the seat. Jesse sat in the back wearing his Sunday shirt, hair combed for the first time in months. Ruby stayed at the ranch with Ida Crawford, who'd arrived the night before with a pie and a shotgun. Any man comes near this property, Ida told Silas, he'll leave with fewer parts than he came with. I believe you, Ida. Good. Now go get that girl her freedom. The courtroom was small, wooden, overheated. Judge Harold Finch presided, a balding man with sharp eyes and no tolerance for theatrics. Arthur Crane sat at one table with Maggie. Across the aisle, Denton Hollister sat with his Kansas lawyer, a slick man named Prescott, who wore a city suit and a city smile. Denton looked different, thinner, harder around the edges. His charming mask was in place, but it fit poorly now, like a suit he'd outgrown. He looked at Maggie when she entered, and she saw it not love, not regret, ownership. The cold, possessive gaze of a man staring at something he considered his. She looked away. Found Silas in the gallery. Found Jesse beside him, sitting straight, jaw set, eyes locked on Denton, with an intensity that made grown men uncomfortable. Denton noticed the boy. His smile faltered. Good, Maggie thought. Be afraid of the children. They're braver than you'll ever be. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Prescott argued Kansas law, marital rights, wifely duty. Crane countered with Wyoming statutes, testimony from 3 Abilene witnesses submitted by affidavit, the sheriff's report from Dusty Creek, Sam Youngblood's written account, Denton's threatening letter to Silas, and the medical records that showed a pattern of injury inconsistent with domestic falls. Then Crane called Maggie to testify. She stood before the judge and told her story, all of it. 8 years compressed into 40 minutes of testimony that left the courtroom silent. She described the first blow, a slap across the face because she'd laughed too loud at a neighbor's joke. The escalation, fists, then boots, then household objects. The iron burn, the dislocated shoulder, the 2 miscarriages, the night she'd decided to run when Denton had wrapped his hands around her throat, and she'd seen black spots blooming in her vision, and thought very clearly, this is how I die. She didn't cry. She didn't waver. She stood in that witness box and spoke the truth with the steady voice of a woman who'd been silenced for 8 years and would never be silenced again. When she finished, Judge Finch removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. He looked at Denton Hollister. Mr. Hollister, do you wish to respond? Denton stood, straightened his coat, put on the smile. Your Honor, my wife is a troubled woman. I love her deeply, and have only ever... Mr. Hollister. The judge's voice was flat. I've reviewed the medical evidence, the witness testimony, and your own letter threatening the minor children of the man currently sheltering your wife. I've also received a separate communication from the Abilene Sheriff's Office confirming that a woman named Jenny Polk, formerly employed at your saloon, has been missing for 2 years. No investigation was conducted. The color drained from Denton's face. I'm not here to investigate a missing person case, Finch continued, but I am here to assess the character of a man petitioning for the return of his wife. And what I see, Mr. Hollister, is a pattern of violence, intimidation, and control that this court will not endorse. Prescott leaned over and whispered urgently in Denton's ear. Denton shook him off. She's my wife, Denton said. Before God... God isn't on the docket today, Mr. Hollister. The law is. And the law of Wyoming Territory grants me the authority to dissolve a marriage on grounds of extreme cruelty. Judge Finch put his spectacles back on. Divorce granted. Mrs. Hollister is free to remain in Wyoming Territory as a legal resident with full rights and protections. The theft charge is dismissed for lack of evidence. Mr. Hollister, you are ordered to have no contact with the petitioner, her place of residence, or any member of the Brannigan household. Violation of this order will result in arrest and imprisonment. He struck the gavel once. Maggie didn't move. She stood in the witness box, hands gripping the rail, staring at the judge like she'd misheard. Ma'am, Crane said gently, it's done. Done. 8 years of fists and fear and silence, and a man in a black robe had ended it with a single strike of wood on wood. She turned to the gallery. Silas was on his feet. Jesse was on his feet. Both of them looking at her with faces so full of pride and love and relief that she couldn't hold it anymore. She walked out of the witness box, down the aisle, and straight into Silas's arms. He caught her, held her, pressed his face into her hair. She felt his chest shudder, and realized he was crying. This man who hadn't cried at his wife's funeral, who'd buried his grief under work and silence, and the daily demands of raising 2 children alone. He was crying in a courtroom in Rawlins, Wyoming, holding a woman he loved because the war was finally over. Jesse stood beside them, one hand on his father's arm, the other on Maggie's back, holding them both up. 10 years old, and already stronger than most men twice his age. Denton Hollister walked past them on his way out of the courtroom. He paused. Maggie felt Silas tense, felt Jesse's hand tighten. She pulled back and looked at Denton. He opened his mouth. Whatever he saw in her eyes, freedom, maybe, or the complete and final absence of his power, made him close it again. He walked out of the courtroom and out of her life. Maggie watched him go. She waited for the fear to come, the familiar dread that pooled in her stomach whenever he left a room because leaving meant he'd come back. But it didn't come. The space where fear had lived for 8 years was empty now, and rushing in to fill it was something warm and fierce and new. She was free. They rode home in golden light. Jesse sat between Silas and Maggie on the wagon seat, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't sit rigid and watchful. He leaned against his father's shoulder and closed his eyes, let himself be a boy. Maggie reached across and took Silas's free hand. He laced his fingers through hers and held on tight. "When we get home," she said, "I want to do something." "Name it." "I want to take Caroline's quilt off the wall." Silas went still. His hand tightened around hers. "Not to put away," Maggie said quickly. "To use. To put it on Ruby's bed. It's been hanging there like a ghost for 2 years, and Caroline didn't make it to be a ghost. She made it to keep her family warm." Silas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "She'd like that." "You sure?" "Maggie, Caroline spent 6 months stitching that quilt for the baby that—" He stopped, took a breath. "For the baby. She'd want it used. She'd want it loved. She'd want Ruby sleeping under it, dreaming about wildflowers." "Then that's what we'll do." When they pulled into the yard, Ruby flew off the porch like a cannonball. Ida stood in the doorway, shotgun propped against the frame pie cooling on the windowsill. "Well," Ida called. "It's done," Maggie said. "I'm free." Ida's face crumpled. She pressed her hand to her mouth, turned away, and didn't turn back for a full minute. When she did, her eyes were red and bright and fierce. "Then come eat pie," she said. "Freedom tastes better with sugar." They ate pie on the porch. All 5 of them, Silas, Maggie, Jesse, Ruby, and Ida, sitting on the steps and the rail and the old rocking chair, passing plates back and forth, talking and laughing, and letting the evening settle around them like a quilt. Ruby leaned against Maggie's side. "Maggie." "Yeah, sweetheart." "Now that you're staying forever, can I call you something?" "You can call me whatever you want." Ruby looked at Silas. He nodded. "Mama Maggie," Ruby said, testing the words, rolling them around in her mouth like candy. "Mama Maggie. Is that okay?" Maggie couldn't speak. She pressed her lips together and nodded, and Ruby threw her arms around her neck and squeezed so hard the world went blurry. Jesse sat on the top step, whittling. He didn't say anything. But when Ruby pulled away and Maggie wiped her eyes, Jesse looked up. "Don't let it go to your head," he said. "She calls the barn cat Sir Whiskers. Her judgment ain't exactly reliable." Maggie laughed. Full and real and loud, the kind of laugh that carries across open land and tells anyone listening that the person making it is alive and grateful to be so. Ida left at sunset with an empty pie plate and a full heart. She hugged Maggie at the wagon, and for once she didn't say anything wise or tough or sharp. She just held on. "Thank you," Maggie said, "for everything. Don't thank me, just live well. That's the only revenge that matters." She drove away. Maggie watched until the dust settled, then walked back to the porch where her family waited. That night, Silas lifted Caroline's wildflower quilt from the wall. He held it for a moment, pressing the fabric to his face, breathing in whatever trace of her remained. Then he carried it to Ruby's bed and spread it gently over the sleeping girl. Maggie stood at the foot of the ladder watching. "You okay?" "Better than okay." He came down the ladder and stood in front of her. She's not gone, Maggie. She's just not here the same way anymore. She's in the quilt, in the kids, in the garden she planted and the house she built, and the man she made me want to be. She made you a good man, Silas. She started the job. You're finishing it. He kissed her forehead. She closed her eyes and stood there, feeling his lips against her skin, feeling the cabin breathe around them, feeling the weight of everything she'd carried for 8 years, dissolving like salt in warm water. From the loft, Jesse's voice drifted down. Can y'all stop being romantic? Some of us are trying to sleep. Silas grinned. Mind your business, boy. Your business is loud. Maggie covered her mouth to keep from laughing. Silas shook his head, banking the fire with the expression of a man whose privacy had been permanently surrendered to children. She settled into the bed by the stove. Silas climbed to the loft. The cabin went quiet, except for breathing and the pop of settling embers. Maggie lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Her hand found the spot where the Derringer used to rest under her pillow. It wasn't there. She'd put it in the cabinet that morning, locked away, not needed. Her hands were empty for the first time in months, and they didn't shake. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd tend the garden. She'd teach Ruby the letter Q. Kiki. She'd work alongside Silas in the sun, and Jessie would pretend not to like her, and the barn cat would wind around her ankles at feeding time, and the world would keep turning the way it always does, indifferent and vast and full of people who sometimes, against all odds, choose to be kind. She'd been starving once. For bread, for mercy, for a place that didn't hurt. She'd found all three on a dusty road in Wyoming, handed to her by a man with rough hands and a gentle heart, and 2 children who taught her that family isn't born from blood. It's built. Board by board, letter by letter, meal by meal, scar by scar. And the woman who'd once begged for water in the dirt was never going to beg again. Not for bread, not for mercy, not for love. Because she had all 3 now earned and given in equal measure, and no man, no law, no locked door would ever take them from her. 4 plates on the table, wildflowers on the quilt, a boy who called her stubborn, a girl who called her mama, and a man who'd looked at a broken woman in the dust and seen someone worth fighting for. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.